This is Guideposts with Dr. Tim Stauffer, a podcast where Tim and his friends engage in purposeful conversation about identity, parenting, culture, faith, and more. Tim Stauffer is a professor of counseling and a licensed clinical counselor. My name is Sam Meyung, and I'm Tim's friend. My life has been greatly enriched by my time talking to Tim and getting his thoughts on many matters that impact my life daily. After listening to this podcast, I hope you'll feel the same. Guideposts are discernment markers. They provide opportunities for direction as well as warnings of pitfalls. Go this way and be careful of that way. We hope that each episode provides some sense of direction as we navigate the challenges of daily life. Thanks so much for listening. Quick disclaimer, the content of this podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your licensed mental health provider. All right, Tim, how are you this morning?
I'm well, thank you. Good to see you again, and looking forward to our conversation today.
Good. Tim, so this morning we wanted to spend some time talking about work and particularly career direction. Like, how do I find a good direction with a career I should take? So I work a lot with high schoolers and college-age students. And, you know, that's right on the verge of entering a new season of life and adulthood where they got to start making some serious decisions about careers. And so this is kind of a big question that comes up a lot when I'm working with these young adults. You know, how do I know what I should do potentially for the rest of my life? And so would love to have a conversation about that this morning.
Well, I think about... well, you know my son well, and he's part of the high school groups that you lead. And I was talking with him a few months ago, and he was expressing this frustration. He was, I think, a freshman or sophomore at the time, and he was expressing this frustration with this double message that he gets from school, and not just from school. I think from culture in a broader sense was that. What are you going to do when you grow up? What's your college interest? What's your career interests? And feeling the pressure, and he goes to an early college, high school. So there's this pressure on kids in that setting to choose their track. Like, am I going to be in mathematics? Am I engineering? Am I medical? And so you got to pick a track as a freshman, a sophomore. And so he was expressing this frustration of, okay, I'm supposed to know. But then there's also this message that they're constantly told, but it's not. It doesn't matter. You have lots of time. It's not like don't obsess about it. Don't panic. You don't have to know what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life when you're 16. And he was just expressing like these are contradictory messages. It's like I'm supposed to choose. I'm supposed to know, and yet the tension of I have no idea, and everybody says that's fine too. And so it's a good topic, and it's an important one. Many adults are making career changes late in life, and are making some significant pivots in what they do and what brings them a sense of purpose and meaning and income, and so it's an important topic. So tell me, like, what led you? How did you make the career decisions that you're making? Like, how did this come about for you?
Yeah, so I do full-time youth ministry, and that was not something I wanted to do growing up. It wasn't even something on my radar, you know. If you were to ask me what did I want to do as a kid, it was a million different things, ranging from being an NFL running back to being an animator for Pixar. Like, I ran the gambit. Right. Later in high school, approaching college, starting to be faced with the reality, okay, you got to make a real choice here. And unfortunately, my athletic abilities were not leaning towards NFL running back.
With 99.9% of other aspiring athletes.
Right. But so deciding to pick something realistic. I decided I would go to college to become a teacher. I was always pretty good at math and science, and I thought I would enjoy that work, and also didn't hate the idea of having summers off, So that's kind of where I started to lean as I went into college. But it was towards the tail end of my high school that I got involved with Young Life, and that's where I personally became a Christian, and then in my time at Ohio State was a volunteer leader. And the more that I participated in the ministry, and the more that I took on like new levels of like volunteer leadership, the more that I really wanted to pursue that. And so I finished with a college degree in education, got accepted into the master's program, but I ended up declining the master's program to continue to work for Young Life. And so this is what I've been doing now for going on 8 years now. And so I really enjoy what I'm doing. Yeah. There's really challenging elements to it, for sure, but personally do really like what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and there's a lot of people who really would like to say that.
Sure.
But don't.
Yeah.
And many people find themselves in careers that leave them feeling a bit jaded or a bit confused, or saying like, is this really what my life's about? Is this meaningful? Is this purposeful? And so many people really grapple with that within their career trajectories.
Yeah.
And so as you watch and listen to young people as they grapple with the decisions about which way to go in terms of career, what are some of the things that have stood out to you that you've heard, or that you would say are the kinds of questions that are being asked?
Yeah. So so in particular, the demographic that I work with are, young Christians, and the big question I hear maybe most often is like trying to determine if they are called to the work. So I think if you were to ask many, they would say, I know what I want to do. I know what I would like to pursue, but then they feel like there's this like real deep tension between what they want versus what they feel like God is calling them into. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a great deal of sense. I think that raises a question for me. It's like, I wonder what forces are at work, or what pressures exist to lead to such a strong question about that. My interests and desires are here, and I feel called by God. Like, there's this internal question I have of like, what is it that keeps us from seeing our interest and desires as an expression of God's calling?
Mm-hmm.
And I get it that there's an element of, when we become Christians and we commit to following the Lord, that we might feel a sense of call that takes us in a direction different than what our sense and desires might be. And yet sometimes I think that perhaps within the church or within Christian environments, we have made that bifurcation too strong.
Sure.
Like, it almost makes sense to me that like your interest in being an animator or being an athlete, it's like, okay, is there something within these desires that we can tap into that really, what I would say, explicates the call that God has on our lives? And how do we help people determine, okay, what fits within this sense of calling? Because I want to do what God has created me to do, designed me to do, has given me the gifts for, and I want to live into that space. And that's challenging, because discerning that, God doesn't just say, this is what I want for you to do.
Right. Well, and I think, because I think the tension lies in a good recognition that just because I desire something doesn't necessarily mean that it's good or what's best for me. Mm-hmm. And I think most of the students that I work with recognize that if I just followed every desire of my heart would actually be pretty disastrous for me. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, in the conversations that I've had, I'm often trying to get them to, okay, what's your motivation behind wanting this career or wanting something else? Mm-hmm. Like, you know, if your motivation is just so I can make a boatload of money and, you know, get an early retirement, I'm like, well, I don't know. That doesn't really map with the characteristics that I see of God and Jesus. So maybe that's a spot where those desires aren't in line with what God would want for you. But I do like what you're saying, though, that I do think sometimes we maybe over pit those desires against what we determine God's calling to be.
Right. Well, I think like there's this sense that if our desire is to just make a lot of money, that's really not a career ambition.
Yeah.
That's saying I want a particular outcome from something without saying anything about what am I really interested in doing. And so that is a fundamental mistake a lot of people make, is like I'm going to just do that which I think is going to make me rich or give me the most income. Well, what about finding some tension or balance between I'm going to live into what I have been created and designed, what fits my personality, what fits my interests and desires, and then within that I will be realistic about the need for this to create a sustainable life income, and whether that's a huge income, whether it's a modest income. I'll balance this sense of calling or this sense of interest and desire with calling, and saying I'm going to lean into that space and wrestle with the tensions of all of that, rather than just making it about how much money I make, because making a lot of money doesn't make people happy. And we all know that, but we all tend to say, well, I'd kind of like to give it a try.
No, and I think that's good. I think actually there's an underlying assumption in the point that I made, that like work in and of itself is bad, and that we're just trying to do just enough to then survive, and the ideal would be to never work again. But that neglects the fact that there was work in the garden before the fall. Like work is not the curse. Like the burdensomeness of work is, but work in and of itself is actually like a good thing and good for us. And so I think when that's a part of the forefront, when thinking about careers and work, that helps to, okay, so what is the good work? You know, in Ephesians, the good works that God has prepared for me to do, you know?
You familiar with Mike Rowe, the Dirty Jobs guy?
Yeah.
I like what he says about this topic, when he says the idea of you should just follow your passions or follow your dreams. Don't let anybody tell you can't do it. You can do whatever you want. It's like rubbish. Like, that's not like,
sure,
our abilities are limited. You can't be an NFL player just because you want to be. It's like most people that want to be an NFL player won't even make it to college football.
Yeah.
And so it's like, no, you can't have everything you want. And so he talks about, don't pursue and follow your dreams and your passion. Find a good opportunity and then take your passion to it. And I think he's onto something really significant, that our passion and purpose in life has to transcend our career. That what we do becomes an expression of our passion, not the fulfilling of our passion. And that means I can do a multitude of different things and have my passion there with me. So when I think about my career trajectory, I was the dean of students at a small Bible college, and I loved the work in many regards. Found it meaningful and purposeful.
Yeah.
I moved from that job. I was interested in business, and I thought, I would like to own a franchise of Tim Hortons, and we were part of a church plant in our local town, and there was the possibility of being able to be in ownership of the franchise in our local town. And I thought, this is a great opportunity. And so I began working in the donut coffee shop, and I took my passion with me to that space. And I could have succeeded in it. Like I had what it took to do that. But when I really started working in that space, I began to see that this doesn't align with my sense of calling, and it doesn't align with the kind of schedule I want to keep and the way I want to do a job. And that led then to say, I need to pivot. It's not a bad idea. It's not like it was wrong, but it's like, this isn't for me. This isn't working. And so I made a huge decision, and I quit that job and headed off to grad school to get my degree in counseling so that I could pursue licensure and start my counseling practice. And so like none of those things were a compromise of my calling or of what it was that God was calling me to do. It's like I could have taken my calling from God into any of those different professions. And so many times we confuse the calling of God with a specific job versus saying God has called us to be present in the world in a particular way. And I will be present in that particular way regardless of what my current job is. And I'll take my passions to that job. I'll take my work ethic to that job. And I will, whatever I do, I will do it wholeheartedly as unto the Lord. I'm going to go there with my passion. Now, it's important to recognize that there are times and particular jobs that do not fit with the way God created us to be. It's like it doesn't fit our personality style, doesn't fit our gift set. And when that's the case, we need to have the courage to pivot or to say, you know what? I thought this represented what I wanted to do. In fact, it didn't. Well, that means I'm going to make a change.
Yeah.
And many people would be in a good spot in life to say, I need to make a change. I need to pursue a career that's going to align with my personality and with my gift set and with my interests and desires without over inflating this sense that it has to be a precise thing in order for it to be okay or for it to fit what God wants from my life. Like if we make that too strict, we become almost immobilized with our indecision or with our lack of opportunity, and it can lead us to feeling stuck.
Yeah. That's good. So for, if you don't mind sharing, so you're talking about, when you were with Tim Hortons, it didn't align with the sense of calling that you had for yourself. Like, what do you feel like that calling was for you that was bigger than just Tim Hortons? Does that make,
Yes.
Not that Tim Hortons, I don't want that to come across as like not a significant career, or like that is a good career if you stayed at Tim Hortons. Like, what was it? Because you make the comment about calling is bigger than a specific job. Mm-hmm. What was, I guess, that calling for you that was bigger than just a particular job?
Yeah, well, I would say that in my personal experience, I have had a pretty direct sense of call from God, like a pretty explicit sense of call, which is not, I would say, is not necessarily normal.
Sure, which maybe won't be helpful for everyone.
Well,
for many people.
For many people, listen, other than that, I would say is is when I think about the explicit nature of how I felt called, it has never been comfortable, and it has always messed up what felt like my trajectory in life. And so sometimes when I tell the stories of how I felt called by God, I will get this response of like, I wish the Lord would give me that kind of clarity about my life. And I'm like, yeah, maybe you do, but it's also quite dysregulating. So if we look through the scriptures and we see this places and times for some people, there's this clear, this is what I want. This is precisely what I'm calling you to do. But it's like, to do that thing requires tremendous amounts of sacrifice and the assumption of a lot of risk and without much guarantee. And you lean into it, and for people who don't experience that, I get it that they might say that would just be really, really helpful. The other side is like, it's also sometimes I think it'd just be kind of nice to be able to choose on my own kind of what really aligned with me, and then just go and pursue that. So when I was a teenager, late teens, I had an obscure or abstract, what I would call, sense of call to ministry. Didn't know what that meant. Didn't know how to pursue, what does it mean to be in ministry? Like my church tradition didn't value higher education, and the encouragement to go to college that just wasn't a thing. Like you don't, unless you had a very clear reason for needing college. So if you wanted to be a nurse or a doctor or something of that nature, well, then of course you can go to college so that for that specific career. But the idea of going to college that just wasn't higher education wasn't particularly encouraged. And so, especially not for ministry, because professional or trained ministry positions, I just had no framework for that at all. And so I began the process of trying to explore and find my way through that space. And I went to Bible college for a bit. I volunteered as a chaplain's assistant in a prison ministry, went back to Bible college. And it wasn't until I was married and in my low to mid 20s that that it began to clarify for me. I had a wise confidant or a mentor or person I looked up to said to me, he said, Tim, why don't you move to Ohio and go to Cedarville University and complete your training there, get a social work degree, and then go on to OSU and get a master's in social work, and then you could work in that field. And I was like, okay, that's what I'll do. So we took a radical step, and I quit my job and sold my house and took all the money I could muster and find and went off to Cedarville. And I went in the psychology route rather than social work because that interested in me more. And in my late 20s, kind of sold out everything I had and took the risk and went to finish my undergrad degree by the time I was 29. And so I'm 10 years behind the game in terms of education and figuring that out. But it's like there was a sense of clarity of, if I want to follow this sense of call and what I'm interested in, I'm going to have to take risk to follow it. And so I leaned into that risk and said, here I go. And when I got into my first ministry job, my first full-time work that I would have called Christian ministry, it wasn't long until I was feeling the burnout of low wages, of just the challenge of working with people, and finding out this is not as easy and as fulfilling and as like, I'm not so sure this is a good fit for me. And that's when I was like, business is more in line with my history and with my way I think. I'm kind of a business mind. And so I decided that's Tim Hortons makes a lot of sense. And having my own franchise, I can do that kind of work. And that's a good idea. Once I started it, I was like, no, this is not working for me. This is not satisfying. This doesn't scratch an itch. And that's when I had a clear sense of call from God to go back to grad school and get my degree in counseling. And again, that was a very disruptive sense of call because I didn't have the money. I had 3 kids, and it's not going to grad school at that stage of life was nearly catastrophic. I mean, it felt a massive change, but I also felt a clear sense that God would provide for us and meet our needs, which he did, but not without a great deal of stress and without a great deal of fear and anxiety and struggle along the way. And what I found is when I started studying about career theory, some of the tensions that I have felt about career began to come out in a personality profile or a personality theory that was developed by a guy named John Holland. And his theory has informed a career assessment called the self-directed search. And so when I took this instrument to understand my personality, all of a sudden my career began to make more sense. The tensions that I have felt, my sense of calling, all of these processes began to clarify for me. Because what I found was that, and what still exists today, is that when I'm doing one thing, I often find that there's another part of my personality that's untapped, and I'd kind of wish I was doing something else. And so the Holland Code, or this self-directed search, showed me that I have 2 factors of personality that are in tension with one, in severe tension with one another.
Okay.
And so there are 6 types of personality factors that are helpful in thinking about career. So the realistic factor of personality is the people who prefer a concrete task. They like working alone, or they like working with other real people. Abstract stuff is not the preferred space. This might be like people like engineers or plumbers or construction workers, things that are really kind of project driven, and the parameters of what's happening are pretty well established.
Would you say those are, you can begin it and you can finish it?
You can begin it, you can finish it. Okay. It's like if I'm going to think about business, it's going to be, I'm going to build dog houses and sheds. And I know I'm building this shed today. I go into and I build the shed, and it's like that framework is what is considered realistic kind of work. Mechanics might be in that space. It's like there's a clarity of space. Dentists, chemists, like there's a lot of range of potential jobs in that realistic field that require radically different levels of training. But they all kind of have this realistic component to it.
Okay.
I was really high in R.
Okay.
And so if you think about these on a hexagon with 6 points, you can think about R being on one point, and then on the opposing point that's the furthest away from that is the social dimension. Okay. So I'm also high in social. So there's my tension within my personality. I like having a project-driven aspect, but I also like the messiness of people. And so if you look at people that are high in the social aspects, these tend to be people concerned about social problems. They want to help other people. It might be like home health, nursing, doctors, counselors, social workers, occupational therapists, teachers, clergy, all the people that we might call people helping careers tend to be very high in the social aspect. So now here's my tension. When I'm working completely with people and I'm immersed in helping, the R of my personality starves. Okay. And it's like, well, this is exhausting. Like this is tiring. I need.
So how did you come to know that that's your personality, that you have both ends of this realistic and social piece? Like, is that just over time you just identify with that language, or
one was looking at the personality theory and saying, oh, I can see if you think about, like, if you're at a party, who would be the people you will tend to connect with?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I will connect with these two kind of different groups. Like there's an element of I can competently go in both settings and feel at home and feel a sense of connection. It's like right now we're building our garage, and it's like I can go and I can hang out with the excavator and the people working there, and I can speak their language, and I feel like, man, I could put on my boots and go out there and I could do this work as a career. Yeah. Like I could do this work and I could enjoy it. But if I did that, it wouldn't be long until the social itch needs to be scratched. Sure. And so looking at the theory help. The assessment tool that often is used to find your code is called the self-directed search. And that instrument, I took that instrument in grad school in my career class, and that gave me a score where I'm like, oh, I'm high S and I'm high R. They're both very strong parts of my personality. Sure. Some of the other aspects of my personality that help inform my career direction is, so if we think again about the hexagon, you have the high R, and then right beside that, the next point over is investigative. Investigative people, they tend to like to use their abstract analytical skills. You might think about them as the thinkers. They complete tasks and often prefer to do so independently. Sociologists, scientists, psychologists, economists, many of those are the careers in the investigative space, researchers. And so I also have a strong amount of I in my personality. It's like I like analytics. I like thinking about things. And so it's like that informs that part of me that loves a higher education. Like I like to think, I like to engage with ideas. I like reading books of complex thinkers. I like listening to podcasts of complex, deep thinkers. I like having that stretch occur. But if I only live there, it's again, my S won't be attended to, and the R may be missing something important. If you keep going around this hexagon, the next point is artistic. Artistic people, they create things, they're imaginative, they're writers, they're performing artists, singers, actors, dancers, photographers, floral design people, fashion. Like these are people who their creative space just bursts to life. And and I don't have a whole lot of the high A. I have some, but we all have some aspects of every factor of these personalities. It's not like like there's none.
It's like a scale.
It's more like each of these. It's more like a scale. Think of like slider buttons on a equalizer or something. It's like we all have elements of all of them, and there's elements of that are necessary. About all of them. It's like we need people with strengths in each of these areas. Next to artistic, the next point on the hexagon is social, and I already talked about how to understand the social aspects of people. Besides social is the enterprising or the entrepreneurial space. These are people who really lean towards leadership roles. They're willing to take risks and challenges. They tend to be extroverted, perhaps even a bit aggressive or strong, like very visionary, forceful people. These would be, you might think about them as the salespeople, attorneys, chief executives, people who are really into that entrepreneurial, enterprising space. Then beside that one, the last of the six is the conventional people. And conventional people are people who are, they like structured tasks. They attend to details. They tend to be pretty conservative in their thinking, not necessarily politically conservative, but they tend to have a cautious, how about not, be careful there. Don't make sure you're following the rules. So accountants tend to be conventional people. It's like accountants aren't known to be the visionaries that are saying, let's go do this. It's like, no, you have the accountant there to crunch the numbers and to give you real data for can you do something or not. And so bookkeepers, actuaries, cost estimators, human resources people, loan officers. These are people who, man, they dot every I, they cross every T, very conventional in the way they approach life. So when you're thinking about a career, you want to think in terms of what personality fit do I have with a particular career? And that's where a lot of people would do well to evaluate whether or not they're in a good career for their personality. And many people are not. Many people have they thought this might be a good fit for them, and then they go and do it, and they find out, no, it really isn't. But now they're stuck because that's what they're educated in. And rather than taking the risk of change, they stay in that spot. But these are ways that I think, like as a Christian, I would say, I believe that this informs God's calling on your life. Like God's calling is not going to be in direct opposition to the personality that he gave. Now, maybe some theologians would argue with me about that, but it seems like a really safe assumption to say that if God created me with a certain personality set, and our personality isn't good, bad, or it's just indifferent. It's just personality is what it is. Sure. And it's like it's a wiring. And so it's like our sense of calling needs to be within our personality set. And that's a good way of discerning, what is God's calling? So when I went to grad school and stopped working at Tim Hortons, I asked a bunch of people in my life about this sense of call of like, if I'm going to make this radical change and quit my job and go to grad school full time, and I have I can't make this decision just on I think I heard God talk to me. Like I need the affirmation of people I trust and people who love me, who will give me honest feedback. And one person that I reached out to said to me, Tim, that really resonates with me. I think that really fits who you are called to be and the gift sets that you have. And then she said to me, what were you doing working in a donut shop anyway? and what she was getting at, I think, was that doesn't fit your personality. Like that doesn't seem like a good personality fit. I was feeling pretty burned out at the time, and I needed a good income, and this opportunity came along, and I took it, and it was a great transition. I'm really glad I made that stopping point in my career, but it is an odd, if you look at my resume, it's kind of an odd blurb in the middle of my
match the rest of them.
Right. But it was my wrestling match with coming to terms with my personality factors that allowed me to see, if I'm working in a high S job, my hobbies better be in the R.
Sure.
I better attend to that factor of my personality. If I'm in a high R job, I'm going to need to attend to the social aspect of my personality, because if not, I will really suffer in that job. And so many people will benefit if they're feeling stuck in a career, evaluating their personality and saying, maybe I should stay in this career and deal with the tension and have the reality of it pays the bills and I need to do this. However, that means my hobbies and my personal interests outside of work ought to be in this other area. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. That makes a lot of sense.
So as you think about those 6, I'm curious, you talked about the satisfaction you feel in your job. Like, how does your work in Young Life and youth ministry map onto these? Like, when you see these, do you feel yourself resonating with any of them? And does it fit kind of how you think about your job?
Yes, definitely. And we, you know me pretty well, and we've talked about my personality a time or two before. And I feel like a little bit of an anomaly in that I like doing a lot of different things, and I'm proficient in a lot of different things. And so looking at these 6, I can more readily tell you which ones I'm not than which ones are like I'm really high in, because I think I'm high in maybe 4 and low in maybe 2. Like, I'm for sure not conventional. That one's got to be low. That's my wife. Like, that's who she is. Yeah. But when it comes to the details and stuff like that, I'm not great at. Yeah. But when I think of the things that are probably pretty high for me, the social piece, my world is built upon relationships, and I love that about my job. Artistic is probably high for me as well. Enterprising, and I think even investigative. And the cool thing about the job that I do is a weird job in that I do a lot of different things within it, and I feel like it touches upon each of these things in a really unique way. Right. And so that's where I think it's probably why I have so much satisfaction. And I think the parts where I do think about the job that I wrestle with are the job responsibilities that fit more in the realistic or conventional tasks. Sure. Those are the tasks that I continuously struggle with in my job. Sure.
Those are the places that we subcontract.
Yeah.
Like those are those places of wisdom as we think about our work. It's like, okay, we hire out or we get support in those areas that don't fit our personality, rather than trying to force ourselves to like something or do something. It means hire the accountant or find the person who's conventional or realistic that can lead the charge in those particular areas. But like when I think about, and as I know you, I'm like, you identified, if I would have had to guess, I would say you're high in S, A, and I. And my guess would be is that if you took the self-directed search and got an actual score, it would be hard to say which of those 3 might be highest.
Yeah.
I would guess that of the 4 that you resonate with, I would guess that the enterprising one would be towards the bottom of that 3.
I think you're right. I have the most love-hate relationship with that one of those 4.
And I say that informed in our other conversations. Like I remember hearing you talk about some of the tasks that you need to do. It's like you can do them and you can do them competently, but they're not your preferred. You're not your preferred space. But if I ask you to engage with me about the Bible Project, you're going to be, you're all in. If you're reading a book you're interested in, so that's your investigative space is really, really strong. When I say, hey, let's talk about the graphic for our podcast. Well, you are like all over it and be like, man, I could just immerse myself in this kind of stuff. I'm like, your artistic musical space is like, it's clear. Your work in youth ministry and the social aspects and the loud, rambunctious group of kids that hang out in your basement.
Yeah.
It's like, that's life-giving to you. And so whenever we have 3 personality factors clumped together, that's where you'll find people most satisfied in their careers, because all 3 of those play together in the sandbox really nicely. If you have a high conventional person and a high artistic person, welcome to tension. Welcome to critiquing everything about their art. It's like, okay, I have this artistic aspect and I really want to put this out, but I'm dreadfully scared it's not going to be good enough. Well, what's that about? Well, it's the conventional side rearing its head saying, not every I is dotted, not every T is crossed. This is far from and so it's like if you're high in conventional and high in art, you're going to feel at the very core of your being a tension within your personality. If you're enterprising and investigative, you're going to feel pull between those because those are across the corner from each other.
Yeah. Okay.
And so the further away those factors are from one another, it moves from synergy to tension. And the tension isn't bad. The tension can inform us. Like for me, the tension between realistic and social have to inform the way I function. And it can be a strength. It can be good, but I just need to be aware of that tension and accept it as, okay, that's part of how I'm wired. How can I leverage that in a satisfying way rather than just fight against it? And that's why I like this personality theory. Is like, it's not a judgmental theory. It's not saying something's right or wrong. It's in essence saying, this is what is, let's accept it. And then we can figure out how to leverage that in a satisfying way.
That's good. That's helpful. So when you say, and this is just to clarify, because I have this in front of me, you know, the little diagram in front of me, and someone listening may not, but when you're talking about physically the letters of this personality diagram being clumped together, or like when they're right next to each other, that's the idea of synergy. When they're sitting opposite of each other on the diagram, that's where you say tension. That's when you'll
feel tension.
Yeah.
And you'll feel tension if you are strong in areas and then you're in a job that's not primarily kind of in line with that. If I
was in a job that was just all conventional tasks, oh boy.
Right. If we sat you down and gave you a spreadsheet and said, you're going to be doing data entry.
Yeah.
Like, you might feel your skin start to crawl.
Yeah.
And the internal organs start to fail as you think about every day you're going to go into your office and you're going to sit down and open your spreadsheets, and you're going to make sure that data is entered, and you're doing the analytics related to that. And you're like, dear God, I cannot imagine that. But talk to somebody who's a conventional person and say, you know what, you're going to work in a hospital setting, and you're going to be the intake person for the ER. And we're going to have you there, and you're going to have to do crisis intervention, and you're going to have to deal with the families who are decompensating because of that.
You'd come home exhausted.
It would be like, how about not? Like, that's like, and so many people are stuck in careers where they're in misalignment to their personality, which I believe is missing God's calling. Like, I think it's a practical way of thinking about God's calling, that we are called to live within our personality space. Now, we have to recognize the tensions of reality of, okay, we got to pay the bills and we got to eat. So if you're a high A person, you might have to take a job in the high S or the high I or the E in order to feed your family or to pay your bills. Which
I would argue is still a part of God's calling on your life to, like, take care of your family and provide and be a contributing member to your society. Like, so that plays a part in it too, like, I think.
Absolutely, it does. But if you're high A, don't go look for the accountant's job.
Sure.
Like look for career fields that can be in that place of expression and creativity. Yeah. But don't be so narrow as that means I need to be a professional musician if you don't have the skills to be a professional musician. You might be great on your worship team band. You might have a hobby of your friends hang out and you have your garage band, or you make music on the side for fun. That is a great way of like what I would say, scratching the artistic itch. If your skill set if your talent is limited in terms of how you can monetize it.
Sure.
Then it's like you might have to work in an adjacent space, or you bring your passion to what you're doing, and recognize that when there's tension, I'm going to evaluate, do I stay in this job because it fits my personality? Knowing that we can't just create some utopian ideal. Like, we do have to live within the constraints of life, but press yourself, like be creative and think about, how can I align my career with this personality theory? Well, that was a fascinating and fun conversation. I like this stuff. It's interesting, and I think it's helpful a helpful way of thinking through career and how we might bring our passion to our work rather than just pursuing our passions.
Is there a way, if someone wanted to do this assessment online, is there, are there versions of this, free versions of this you could take online?
There's there might be some free versions of it. There's a cheap version. It's like $9.99, I think, like about $10. And it's called the self-directed search. If you Google self-directed search, you can take the assessment. And what's really neat about that assessment is that it will give you a wide range of career fields where people with your personality space, these are the jobs that people tend to work in that have this personality mix.
Yeah.
And so it compares the personality structures of people who work within different careers. So it can give a lot of career ideas. So you can take the assessment and you find out that, okay, you're an SAI.
Yep.
And, okay, what are the careers people tend to work in that field? And it can give you some ideas to consider.
Cool. That's great. I like this because this is specifically geared towards careers, as far as personality tests go and stuff like that. Yeah. So that's helpful. Cool. Great. Well, thanks, Tim.
You're welcome. It was a fun conversation, and thanks for having me.
Great. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Guideposts with Dr. Tim Stauffer. If you're finding this podcast beneficial, please share it with a friend or leave us a review. Also, make sure to check out the show notes where you can find links to resources as well as an email address. We want to hear from you. Send us your questions, feedback, and topic ideas for future episodes. Thanks for listening.